Hey, how are you doing? Welcome back to the channel. So I've been starting to play a new game, as you've probably seen by the title, Vampire Rivals. And as you've seen from my other videos, I've got a long history with running vampire games set in the world of darkness. So that's the first book I ever got for it, which was the second edition. Way back in the early 90s, probably 94 I think. And I've been doing loads with the V5 setting right now. And as I've been starting to play the card game, what I thought I would do is a series of videos taking my experience with the card game and experience with the lore and marrying them together. So if you're a player of the card game, you can get the lore that you need to play the game. Because I'm playing the game, I'm not going to give you loads of lore that you don't need. There's loads of other really good content out there. What I'm going to be doing is focusing on the cards and help you understand the cards and maybe how the cards work with the lore and the background and the role-playing game. As you've just seen there with the books, I've got a long history with the world of darkness, specifically Vampire, the Masquerade, and I've done loads of live role-playing as well. So again, I'll be able to draw on some of those because the tabletop game and the live role-playing game, actually, because of the players involved in it and the style of games, had some divergent ways of thinking about things. So I'll pull all that together for you as well. I've also done loads of card games, and in the 90s and the aughts I played a load of Vampire Eternal Struggle. I finished becoming Scottish champion one year. It was a really good game. And since then I played loads of Games of Thrones and Arkham Horror. And Game of Thrones I really enjoyed playing at a competitive level as well, but it was the background that drew me to Game of Thrones first. And it was through the Game of Thrones that I first heard about Rivals, and a lot of the people and podcasts that I follow, when Game of Thrones kind of ended, said Rivals was a good match. And with it being Vampire, how could I resist? The other thing about Rivals, we were looking at whether me and my pals were looking at where we were going to do VTES, Vampire the Eternal Struggle, which is another vampire card game, of Rivals. Now, Vampire Eternal Struggle has a collectible card game format, and Rivals is more of that living, I think it's called expandable card game. That was one of the things. I don't really like collectible chase card format games. So the living card game element of it is something I knew from the Fantasy Flight games, and I thought was the best way for me to take part. And the other thing going for it is published by Renegade, and they've got the license to print, I say license, they're in cahoots with White Wolf to produce the books. So what I figured was this would be a much more stronger link to what's going on in the world. Whereas obviously VTES has taken its own path and meandered through the world as it's gone on. So I haven't played much Rivals. Played a few games to get started. We've set up like a mini play group in Glasgow, so we're going to be meeting up quite a bit to play some games. I've got tickets sorted out for the Prince of the City event in Bathgate, so really looking forward to all of that. So there'll be some of my adventures through the card game as we're going through there. So what have I got planned for the series of videos? So I'm going to be doing a video on each of the clans, how they're playing the thing, how they're linked to the card game. I'll be talking about who they are, the history, what they look like now, their powers, and how that's reflected in the cards. Also, what we could expect for them for the future. I'm also going to talk about the title cards, the traditions, how they fit into vampire society, and other things as it comes along. And this episode is going to be me talking to camera, but future episodes, I've got a rig set up, I'll have my mats down, I'll physically be looking at the cards, talking about the cards, talking about the lore and background. So I'm really interested, if you want to see anything or hear anything that I can do, I'm really interested in your feedback, and happy to chat in the comment sections as ever and answer your questions and ideas for videos. So yeah, like every YouTuber, I will ask you to like and subscribe, grow the channel, blah blah blah, catch up with all the videos. And like I said before, I'm not going to be delving too much into the mechanics and how the game works. There's actually a really good resource out there, podcasts. I listen to a load of podcasts when I go out into the hills and walk. And I found What We Do in Elysium is a really excellent podcast for mechanics and cards, much better than I could ever do. So that's why I'm focusing on setting and lore, looking at my skill set. So today we're going to talk about the key background settings. What's it about vampire? The big picture, and I'll get this done in the daylight before night comes and the vampires hunt me down for breaking the masquerade. So vampires, where do vampires come from? So they have a mythical creator, and that is Cain. Cain of Bible fame, Cain of Abel. Cursed by God, and he became the first vampire. Now he would create 5 other vampires, and they would establish a city called Enoch, the first city where vampires ruled openly. Those 5 vampires will then go on to create 13 more vampires called the Antediluvians. And each one of those are the clan founders. So in the game there's 13 clans, and each one has an Antediluvian founder. Then there was a revolution from the Antediluvians, and they slew the 5, and Cain got angry, and it all went to hell from there. So the Antediluvians is what we call the first generation. Cain's the first, the 5 were the second, they're the third generation. They will go on and create their children called the Methuselahs, and they will be the 4th generation. So every time a vampire creates, you're going down a generation, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, etc. So in modern nights, we're up to the time when there are 13 generations removed from Cain, called the 13th generation vampires. And these vampires, when they create duskborn, they're called thin bloods. So their blood isn't as strong as a regular vampire's blood. There's advantages and disadvantages with that. So even though the Rivals game treats a Duskborn as a clan, they're not a clan. Now we've talked about 13 clans. I'm not going to go into the details of the clans here now, but each clan has a weakness linked to their founder. In V5, version 5, we'll talk about if I mention V5, there's been 5 editions of the tabletop role-playing game. The first, the second, the third, which was known as Revised, the 4th, which is known as V20, which was done for the 20th anniversary of the game coming out, and the current one, which is kind of called V5, version 5. So in V5, this is called a Bane. So for example, the Bruja are close to frenzy. The Toreador must be surrounded by beautiful things, and if they're not, or the Banes are triggered, then they suffer dice penalties to what they're going to do in-game. It's not just a weakness that a clan gives you, it also determines your disciplines. And disciplines are the vampiric powers that a vampire has access to. Each clan has 3 disciplines that they learn innately, they don't need a teacher for. There's quite a few disciplines which are shared, so if we look at the core game clans, for example, Auspex is shared between the Toreador and the Malkavians. Not in the core set. Celerity is shared by the Toreador and the Bruja. Presence is shared by the Ventru and the... get confused. Presence is shared by the Toreador, the Ventru and the Bruja, for example. Some clans have more unique disciplines to them. So, for example, Protean in V5 is shared between the Gangrel and the Zamitzi. Oblivion is shared by the Hecata and the La Sombra. And there's been a few changes over the years which meant that disciplines change between the clans. So, for example, the Hecata and the La Sombra. Hecata used to have Necromancy, La Sombra used to have Obtenebration, and now they're kind of subsets of the power Oblivion. Now, a vampire can learn other disciplines. So, for example, if I was playing a Toreador, and I normally get Auspex, Celerity, and Presence, I could take the blood of a Gangrel and maybe learn Protean from that Gangrel. So what you might see in the future, even though the core set cards are all pretty much, the clans have got the vampires have got the clan specific cards on, what I would expect to see is start to see some vampires with out of clan disciplines as well and effects, and that will give you more deck building options. So the vampire condition, what makes the World of Darkness vampires vampires? Vampires in the World of Darkness sleep during the day. So they can wake up in certain circumstances during the day, but they're all sluggish and slow. Part of that is they suffer extra damage from fire and sunlight and certain supernatural powers. And like sunlight doesn't ash them straight away, but it starts burning them and makes them go on fire. And this is called aggravated damage, which is a term you'll see in the day. And if you take too much aggravated damage, you turn to dust, you're burned up and you're dead. And that's why it destroys vampires in the game. Other damage can generally be healed. Take loads of damage, you can heal it back. The blood helps you heal. Take too much regular damage, you go into a sleepful state called torpor. Again, you'll see that in the game. And you'll slowly mend during torpor to a point where you can rise again. There's other types of damage called superficial damage, and superficial damage is kind of damage that vampires can shrug off. And again, you'll see that represented in the game as well. Now, a stake through the heart would kill traditional vampires, but in the World of Darkness, a stake through the heart would just render that vampire into a torpor state. And that vampire can never heal and come awake until that stake is removed from the heart. Now, vampires, it's all about the blood, of course. And the blood of vampires is what drives healing and what gives them their disciplines, as we discussed. So vampires need blood to survive. When a vampire wakes up every night, there's a chance to lose some of their blood. So vampires essentially live to feed on blood, as you'd expect. Now, for younger vampires, any sort of blood will do. But as you get older, it becomes you can only feed from humans. And rumours are that the eldest vampires can only feed on blood from elders, the more potent blood. Now, a vampire does not need to kill their victim to feed. And when they feed from somebody, there's a mystical kind of event that occurs called the kiss. So the victim will feel really groggy and sort of forget the interaction, but have kind of pleasant memories from it. This can be added by other vampiric powers like dominate, for example, or presence. And the vampire can lick the bite marks and they would heal on the mortal, so there'd be no evidence that they're being fed from. And the vampire's blood itself has some more innate properties. So as I said about healing and fueling disciplines. Now, vampire's blood, if you drink it, you would become bound to that vampire blood bond. And a blood bond is you would feel intense feelings of loyalty and love to that vampire. But you might also be aware that these are artificial feelings. So that is certainly a way that elder vampires keep younger vampires in check. Now, the blood can be given to mortals, which would also blood bond them, but would turn those mortals into retainers to obey and do what that vampire wanted. And the term for these mortals that serve the vampires is ghouls. And they actually have to regularly ingest vampiric blood, a horrific thing in itself if you think about it, but they do have access to some of the properties of blood, but in a much weaker state than the vampire itself. And with the blood, we talked about generations earlier. A vampire can commit diablerie. This is where they drain a vampire of all their blood and then go one step further and devour the soul of the vampire. The vampire that's just been devoured would be ashed, would die, final death as it's called, but the soul energy power would go into the vampire that's just committed the diablerie, and if there was an older generation, I would gain the powers and my generation would lower. Diablerie is an abhorrent act, mainly often banned from vampire society, but still it occurs, and you can actually get addicted to diablerie. And one of the things about diablerie is if you take somebody's soul which is more powerful, then it might take over your body as well. So it's an act that society finds repugnant. So I talked a bit there about vampires themselves, and you don't have to stay in your clan coven. You can join different groups, and And in game terms, you see coteries of vampires form, groups of vampires. You see that in the table in the game as well. So you can have any clan combination you want, that your players want. And there's reasons for vampires to work together. And vampire society is structured along 3 major sects in the world. There are other minor ones. The game itself at the moment seems to be based around the Camarilla, and I'm going to talk a bit about the Camarilla, but there's also the Anarch movement and the Sabbat. What you find with the major sects is each one of the major sects have some clans where the majority of them exist within that sect, and they're known as the kind of supporters and founders of those sects. Whereas other members might exist in the other sects. So for example, the Camarilla, in current V5 Chronicle, the main clans which form the Camarilla are the Ventru, Toreador, Malkavian, Nosferatu, and the Tremere. The Bruja and the Gangrel were members. The Gangrel left and became independent, but they've now kind of gone to the Anarchs, and the Bruja left in the Convention at Prague in 2012 when Archon Theo Bell killed one of the Ventru founders. So that is the Camarilla, as was. Now, the Assamites, the Banu Hakim, and some of the Sombra are wanting to join with the Camarilla. Now, I mentioned the Anarchs, so the Bruja and the Gangrel. They're joined by what was known as the Followers set, which became the Ministry. And there's some of the Zamitzi are wanted to join the Anarchs from the Sabbat. So the Sabbat, the Anarchs, the Camarilla is a feudal structure where the elders control the youngest. The Anarchs don't like that, so they're formed, and they're all about freedom. Freedom from the man, freedom from oppression, freedom from the ivory tower. Then finally there's the Sabbat. And I said before that Cain was a mythical first founder. The Sabbat believed they're on a religious crusade following his will to destroy the elders, the antediluvians, who killed Cain's first 5 children. There's a bit more to it than that. There was a revolution in the Middle Ages, and that's where the Sabbat was formed. And the Lasombra and the Zamitzi first formed the Sabbat, and they thought they'd slain their antediluvians, but antediluvians are pretty difficult to kill. And they had lots of other criminals and members join them. They become the anti-tribute, and they are vampires of the clans, and they've forsaken their clan allegiance to join the Sabbat. But anyway, Camarilla. How's the Camarilla structured? Big picture, there's the inner circle, and they deal with global strategy and organisation. Each one of the clans that form the Camarilla have an inner circle member, and they guide the sect, but they don't control it on a local level. On a local level, there's the prince. Because it's based, the Camarilla is the elders controlling the younger in a feudal structure. The prince's word is law within their domain. Camarilla have 6 traditions, which all Camarilla members are expected to follow. And as long as a prince maintains those traditions in their domain, the inner circle leaves them alone. And those traditions are the masquerade. Vampires must hide from mortals. In days gone by, there was the Inquisition, when mortals found out about vampires and burned a lot of vampires. So if they hide from the mortal government, then that will keep all vampires safe. There is the progeny, which is about creating vampires. You must gain permission to create vampires. It stops overpopulating, which would endanger the masquerade. Domain, the eldest vampire in a domain, often the prince, their word is law within their domain. Then you have hospitality. Whilst you're in somebody's domain, they're expected to give you hospitality and help you as required. Then there is the accounting. For if you create children, you are responsible for those children, and you are held accountable for what they do. And finally, there's a destruction. Only the prince can sanction the destruction of a vampire within a domain. I'm going to do a video on titles. That's going to be the second video I do, and looking at the card titles, and I'll talk a bit more about those titles, and you get a bit more sense about how the Camarilla works. And that's it. So every city is bound by a prince that rules, supported by a series of underlings, and those traditions are held. The oldest vampires are called elders. Then you've got the ancilla. The ancilla tend to be 50 to 200, 250 year old, and anybody younger than that is known as neonates. So that is a quick rundown on vampire, the society, what they are, the clans and the traditions. I'll be delving into more and more details in more videos. So again, I'm happy to chat about my hobbies. So any questions, thoughts, ideas for content, give me a shout in the comments below. So thanks for watching. I look talking to you again in the future. Remember to like and subscribe for content. Until then, I'll leave you with one of my favourite quotes. Yeah, all great content has a good outro. I've never been able to do good outros. So what I thought I would do is read you the quote from the back of the book, which is also on the back of the V5 book, which I've always thought, always like. So I'm going to share a quote with you at the end of every episode from vampire, from characters, etc. So, no one holds command over me, no man, no god, no prince. What is a claim of age for ones who are immortal? What is a claim of power for ones who defy death? Call your damnable hunt. We shall see who I drag screaming to hell with me. And that is attributed to Gunter Dorn. That's Ungeheuer Down. And I'm very sorry if I butchered the German there. But anyway, you have a good one. Goodbye.